All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you guys all for being here with us today. Today we have Beth Steckler from North Dakota Department of Public Instruction presenting. Before she goes and gets started, just a quick reminder to please leave your microphones and your videos off during the presentation to eliminate any distraction. Also, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box and I will relay them to Beth as we go along throughout her presentation. So I will turn it over to Beth.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you to Cheryl and Kylie for allowing me to have some of your time today. I really do appreciate it. As Kylie said, I work at North Dakota Department of Public Instruction, and one of my portfolios is the McKinney Vento Homeless Education Program. We work with kids pre-K through 12th grade that have been identified as experiencing homelessness. And so I'm just going to share today a little bit about the program and about the responsibilities of liaisons. We have a homeless district liaison in each school district. And these liaisons have a number of responsibilities, one of which is really being a navigator or a coordinator. It's important that we focus on school, but we also know that if youth have to worry about where they're living or if there's food on the table, they're not going to be focused on education. So while our focus is education, we also reach out and work with others in the community to assure that they have the basic needs met. I'm going to start just talking a little bit about McKinney Vento Act. And this may be a bit confusing because there's one McKinney Vento Act, and under the McKinney Vento Act, there are two definitions, one for education and one for HUD. The HUD definition is a little bit more stringent in regards to how they see the experience of homelessness. We have a little bit broader definition, but at no means I see these youth still at risk. So under the McKinney Vento Act, state educational agencies such as North Dakota Department of Public Instruction must ensure that each homeless child and youth has equal access to the same free, appropriate public education, including public preschool education as other children and youth. Homeless children and youth must have access to the educational and related services that they need to enable them to meet the same challenging state academic standards to which all students are held. I apologize for that. The overarching mandate of McKinney Vento is to ensure that students experiencing homelessness are identified, enrolled, and have a full and equal opportunity to succeed in school. And when I talk about the full and equal opportunity, academics are important, but we know in research it says if students are involved and engaged, they're more likely to graduate. So we look at co-curricular activities and extracurricular activities. Co-curricular activities may be, for example, STEM or other activities that have educational elements to it, but are in a club form. Extracurricular activities look at basketball, speech, and those things. And so we really encourage these students, if possible, to be engaged both academically and in those co-curricular and after-curricular activities. Now, the definition of homelessness, like I indicated, there's two definitions under McKinney Vento, one for HUD and one for education. As I said, education incorporates more individuals within its definition. So the term homeless children and youth under McKinney Vento definition means individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, and includes children and youths who are sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, are living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to the lack of alternate adequate accommodations, are living in emergency or transitional shelters, or are abandoned in hospitals. Children and youth who have a primary nighttime residence that is in a public or private place, not designed or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for humans, beings, and then children and youth who are living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned building, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings, and migratory children who qualify as homeless for the purpose of this subtitle because the children are living in the above circumstances. So when I talk about this being a little bit broader than the HUD definition, we are looking at youth that are doubled up. That means that they are living with others. It may be in an apartment, it may be in a home or a camper, and it is because they cannot themselves afford to rent or own. And so we do identify youth that are doubled up. That means they do have a roof over their heads. However, this is also a dangerous situation, and we've seen families that have lived in one room, and there's 5 family members and are living with another individual. We've seen we have about 300 unaccompanied homeless youth, meaning they're not in the care of their parents or guardian, that oftentimes are staying with others, and that can be very dangerous for them. Sometimes they do have, they find someone that is very safe place, but we also find people where they have been trafficked due to them being given a place to live. Then they're expected to do other things for that place to live. And so that's our definition. It's a very gray definition. I work with liaisons in each school district in helping them identify, because sometimes it is hard to identify, particularly unaccompanied youth. I know when the oil boom was going on, a lot of the individuals identified were in RVs. However, that is not an experience of homelessness. Some of those RVs are very adequate in their accommodations. In fact, they oftentimes are more expensive than the house I live in. If they have hot water, if they have electricity, that is not an experience of homelessness. Again, it's looking at, do they have another place to go, and do they have some sort of agreement in place that says that they can stay there? Does that make sense? Do you have any questions in regards to the definition? The HUD definition does not talk about those individuals that are doubled up. Okay. As I indicated, each public school district has a liaison. So they have somebody within that school district that is designated to identify youth experiencing homelessness and also to assist them. And again, a lot of our focus is educationally, but we also understand that if these youth don't have their basic needs met, that they aren't going to be successful. That if you have to worry about where you're sleeping that night, or if you're going to have food, the last thing you're going to focus on is education. And so we do ask our liaisons to reach out and work in the community and try to address those needs first. Because again, you cannot learn if you don't have your basic needs taken care of. But the 10 responsibilities of the district and the liaisons is first to identify students experiencing homelessness. One of the ways that this is done is that when students start school, they have to fill out a registration packet. And in that registration packet, we talk about where they live. They have to identify if they're renting, or if they own, or if they're doubled up or in a shelter. And so we hope that we catch youth that are experiencing housing instability. We know we miss some, but in that registration packet, that's how we identify. We also give that to students coming into schools to help us identify. What we know is that oftentimes youth experiencing homelessness often go from district to district trying to find a stable place to live and to be. And because of each move, these kids are farther and farther behind in their education. And we know the farther they get behind, the more likely they will to drop out of school. And while they drop out of school, somebody will catch them, whether it's juvenile justice, whether it's the mental health system, the social service system. Somebody will catch those kids. So we really try to focus on helping those kids stay in school. We try to help the families hook up with services and supports so they can find a stable living environment. Another responsibility is to ensure students experiencing homelessness are enrolled and have a full and equal opportunity to succeed in school. Again, I talked about that not only being academics, but co-curricular and extracurricular activities. Families and students receive educational services for which they are eligible for. When we look at statistics, we know that kids that are experiencing homelessness actually have more learning disabilities. They have more health issues. And also when they are moving from school or school district to another district, they are oftentimes behind in school. And so we ask those liaisons to work with their counterparts in the school to identify what educational services do you need. Do you need to be on a individual education plan? Do you need to have Title I services? And Title I services are those for youth that are lower socioeconomic, and you can have reading programs, math programs. They cover a lot, but we really want to identify what their needs are as well as their strengths, and open those opportunities up to them. Families and students receive referrals to appropriate services, and this is what we find very important: the health, the dental, mental health, housing, and early intervention. I always have a number of liaisons who will give me a call, and a family will come in and they say that they have no place to go for the night, and can you help me, because they have ended up evicted, or they've traveled to find a family or relatives that they can live with, and the relatives kick them out. So we do have liaisons that try to reach out in the community. Prior to school, each school year, they're supposed to reach out and introduce themselves to partners in the community, whether it's housing, early intervention, health, and dental, and identify themselves to facilitate that working process, because we have a number of youth that do end up experiencing homelessness. Just at the beginning of COVID, for example, we had one family that was evicted from their home. They had a number of children, a mother, and there was no shelters open due to COVID. And the liaison really worked in conjunction with other providers to find that family a place to stay temporarily, and then assisted with them moving into an apartment. Parents and guardians and unaccompanied youth are informed of educational rights and opportunities available to their children, and are provided meaningful opportunity to participate. A public notice of rights is disseminated. That public notice of rights, you may have seen it in the community. We put it in schools, and it just talks about your rights. If you're experiencing housing instability, that you have a right to certain educational rights, and to direct them to the liaison, and the liaison will go over those rights. We also put them up in various places in the community, whether it be social services, a laundromat, a church. It's really dependent on the liaisons in the community. Our liaisons in West Fargo and Fargo, they actually, the West Fargo liaison has these notices in Fargo and in Moorhead. And they really work together, because some of the families just kind of go over the borders. And so they work to identify, are you in Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo, and reach out to them. In smaller communities, it may just be the grocery store or the school. But again, we try to get those notices up so that families will reach out to the person in the district that is identified. And I would encourage you, if there's ever a issue that you have in regards to your experience, if you're working with a family that might be facing eviction and they have kids with them, really encouraging them to talk to their liaison, and the liaison really helping navigate that. We are very willing to reach out and help and try to navigate some of that for them. Enrollment disputes mediated, that's internally within the school. We also provide transportation. For example, if an individual went to West Fargo, experienced homelessness, and found temporary housing in Fargo, West Fargo would transport them back and forth between West Fargo and Fargo to ensure that they can continue staying in the West Fargo school district. Again, the more moves that these kids have to different schools, the farther and farther they lag behind, and the farther and farther they get from being engaged within the school. They lose their peers, they lose trusted teachers, and they become more isolated. So we really want to provide a concerted effort to keep these kids in one place, in one school district, and provide those supports so that they can graduate and go on. We have professional development that each school needs to provide to school personnel, as well as community. I think it's the larger communities, for example, like West Fargo, Bismarck, Mandan, Williston, that provide a lot of community presentations. Smaller communities often don't see homelessness, and I'm not saying that they don't. We do have a number of small communities that are doing better at identification. But again, because their community is smaller, they may not have the large organizations like homeless coalitions to do some presentations. So they will do it more on an individual basis. But they really want to reach out and partner with any entity that is working with youth and families experiencing housing stability. And then ensure unaccompanied homeless youth are enrolled in school, have opportunities to meet the same challenging academic standards or other students, including receiving partial credit, and are informed of their status as independent students for FAFSA. FAFSA is related to college entrance financial aid. And so we do reach out to our students and encourage them about college and career opportunities after high school, because we know if they get an education, they're more likely to be able to get a job that will sustain them, that they can get a place to live, and that they have the opportunity to have food and a more stable life. So overall, those are the responsibilities of districts and liaisons. I'll give you a link at the end of this PowerPoint where it will go through every liaison within North Dakota. For example, the West Fargo liaison will give you the name and the number. It will give you Belcourt's name and number of the liaison.
Beth, we have a question.
Hey.
It's kind of a two-part question, I believe. If a parent does not enroll their child in school, is there a way to find children who are classified as homeless and not in school?
Well, it's a two-part answer, I would guess. A lot of times I have a system, I do have a system at the state level. The liaisons are supposed to identify a youth that is experiencing homelessness. So for instance, if you're in West Fargo and the liaison has identified you as experiencing homelessness, and then you disappear, there's going to be some concern there. Or if the West Fargo liaison, the parent reaches out and says, I'm going to move to this district, that liaison does not have to get a release of information. They can call that district and say, you should be enrolling in this school. So that's the only way right now I have the ability to track students that are experiencing homelessness.
And then maybe you answered this, or if the kids that are not in school, for example, too young, is the only way to find them if the parent or the child himself are reaching out?
Well, there's a couple of things. We are working with early intervention also. And one of the things that I will do, and it is tricky, if there's a family that has no children in pre-K or 12th grade, I know early intervention does some work in trying to reach those kids and identify 0 to 5-year-olds, but it can be difficult. I know one of the things that we do when we're meeting with students is we ask them about their family composition, if they have younger siblings in the home. If they have younger siblings in the home, then we talk to the family in regards to services and supports for them, whether it's early intervention, or pre-K. Not all districts have a public pre-K. So we do ask if they want to get involved in pre-K, because we really encourage that, and working with Head Start to get them involved. That's our link. And I wish we're working on the link to be better, because again, from 0 to 5, unless you're enrolled in school, it's very difficult to find and help you unless a parent has stepped forward or unless early intervention is involved. And so we have been making an effort to really talk to families and children when they come in and ask, do you have younger siblings in the home? Does that answer the question, Kylie?
I believe so. There was, yep, she said, yep.
Okay, great. Okay, all right. And then I'm just going to share the 3 state goals that I have implemented for North Dakota Department of Public Instruction and the liaisons that are working with families, children that have housing instability. First, we really want young children experiencing homelessness that will participate in quality early childhood programs at the same rate as their house peers. And that goes to the question of the individual that just asked the question. We really do know that the earlier that we can reach out to kids that are experiencing housing instability or food instability and get them into supports and services and into education, the better outcomes they will have. And again, it is hard when you don't have really a guide to find these kids, but we will do our best. And when we do a strengths needs inventory with a child identified and the family identified, at asking, do you have younger children in the home? Also, we want by 2025, the state graduation rate for the students experiencing homelessness will reach 85%. Unfortunately for these students right now, we are only at 68%. 68% of students experiencing housing instability graduates. And like I said, that means they're going to be caught by someone. If they don't graduate, if they don't go on to find a career or go to college, then we will be looking at the court system, social services, one of those elements. So we really want to do our best to wrap around supports for these youth to graduate. And I'll tell you what, I'll tell you a story. It amazes me. These youth really amaze me. I had a young youth who he went between the foster care system and experiencing homelessness when he was with his mom. He would sleep on park benches. He would stay with friends. Once he was removed from foster care, that happened on his birthday, he was not identified in the school district. And again, we had to step up and do some education on this. He was told by both his mother and father that they did not want him in his life. He was on his own now. And he signed out of foster care, which it seems, why would he sign out of foster care? Because you can do 18 and older. But he had been sick of people telling him what to do, and he wanted freedom. That's what he thought. But he really struggled, as anyone would do. So he was basically homeless, spending time with people. He was still trying to graduate. Smart kid, very smart kid, athletic kid. But we saw his behavior go down and just acting up. So he got kicked out of school, unfortunately. Had we identified him early, and we did, we identified him after the fact, and we were able to help him find housing. We were able to help him graduate. But when we don't identify these kids, then they don't have those supports and services. And here's an 18-year-old that really really did want to graduate. He already had a college that he wanted to go to, and his behavior did get him kicked out. There are some protections if you experience homelessness, but his behaviors were a result of his parents saying, we want nothing to do with you, you figure it out yourself. So we do want to help those students graduate. And then in 2022, we want to be able to identify and assist students experiencing housing insecurity on North Dakota college campuses. We are working with Bismarck State College right now to start a pilot project in helping some of these youth complete college, or they have a new program, a polytechnical college, which is also a hands-on. You can get a degree and also be paid for job shadowing. And we're really looking at BSC to work with. We know that some of these kids will look at college or will look at careers and say, I don't have enough money to go, or what about the housing deposit, or what about the application fee? So we're trying to look at that and look at if we have ways to waive those barriers for these kids and give them support so that they can get a career or a trade and graduate. So those are the three areas that we are working on.
We have a question. Is there education for the education system to look for signs that a child is having that could be from homelessness?
Yeah, as I indicated, all districts must have a enrollment procedure where at registration there is a document that talks about where you're living, so we can follow up to see if you are experiencing housing instability. However, you have that whole year where kids may end up experiencing housing insecurity. And so we do a lot of education on what are those signs that we're looking for. Are the kids wearing clothes on a regular basis and not washing them or wearing the same clothes? Are they falling asleep? Are they hoarding food, or do they come to school without food? Are they distracted? So there's a number of things that we look at that are identifiers, that could be identifiers that they are experiencing housing insecurity. It's much easier to identify those experiencing housing insecurity in the elementary grades. They will usually talk about it and say, well, I'm living with so-and-so, or we slept in the car last night. The older the child gets, the more difficult it becomes to identify if a child is experiencing housing insecurity, because they are less likely to talk. So we still look at those signs in regards to, are they showing up late? Are they falling asleep? Again, are their clothes clean? Now, there could be different reasons, and there's obviously a gentle way to approach it to find out, but we do education on that. Is there anything additional to that, Kylie?
Just a couple comments. I feel bad for the boy who got kicked out of school when it was obvious he was having problems. McKinney Vento form at most school districts ask about homelessness. You pointed out signs I've never thought of. Great meeting.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, now I'm going to actually just share some data that we have so you can kind of get a picture of what homelessness, student homelessness in North Dakota looks like. This data is taken from each liaison needs to identify certain elements or identify youth, and then put that data into a system. And so I can look statistically at our areas of need, and I do, to see what we can do better or how we can help better, but it also gives you a good picture of what's occurring in North Dakota. So I'm wondering, Kylie, can you, I'm wondering if I can put out a question, how many students do you think are experiencing homelessness in North Dakota yearly on a regular basis? If you can pop it in the chat, and Kylie can maybe shout out some numbers.
$2,000, $1,000.
Okay.
125, 540, 250.
Okay. The number is 2,658. We will ebb and flow around 3,000. And again, I am working very hard with districts to better identify, because we know that we have some issues with identifying youth, but we are looking at about 2,658. I believe it's higher than that, because again, we have to work on that identification. We have to work on the stigma about housing insecurity. A lot of families are embarrassed about talking about this, and there's a lot of stigma related to it. And I will always, when I present, talk about my own experience. I went to school. I have a number of degrees. I married a man who had a wonderful career. We had jobs, and then my husband died. He became ill, was sick for 3 years, and passed away. At the same time, my kids had the same disease he did. And so I was in a situation where I was working, great job, but the amount of their medications per month was equivalent to what I was taking home in pay. The only reason that I was fortunate enough to remain in my house is that my husband had life insurance. So I do share this with people, because I think the stigma surrounding housing is that that person doesn't work. Well, most of the people that are experiencing housing instability actually do work. They work 1 or 2 jobs, but they may not have that education that provides them the amount of funding they need to have a stable home. In my case, you know, I did get that education, but looking at the needs of my family and the cost of medication, I was barely breaking even. So again, when I ask what people think about homelessness, they'll often talk about the man on the side of the road with a dog and a sign saying, you know, can you give me money for food? Well, there are veterans that are experiencing homelessness that are both male and female. Right now, what we see as the top demographic group experiencing homelessness are young mothers and their children. And that is nationwide. That's not just within North Dakota, but nationwide. So out of those 2,658 students, they also oftentimes have parents with them and younger siblings. And again, this data is from 2019, 2020. And here's where our youth are living. 244 last year were sheltered. That means they were living in a shelter designed to assist families that did not have housing or could not access housing. 2,466 were doubled up. And this is where I think sometimes our liaisons will maybe interface with housing a lot, because the families will double up sometimes in rental apartments that they cannot have more people, but they have offered a family member or a friend who has no place to go to share their apartment until they can find a place, and then they can't find a place. Our liaisons have often been contacted and said, well, they just got kicked out and the other person lost their housing because they weren't supposed to have other people in there. So we do have that. And, you know, if you come to some situations like this, please reach out to us and we will assist. We had another situation where we had youth that were living in a wonderful apartment, but their behavior was really taking a toll, and there was damaging going on. Even though they were not homeless per se, they were on the verge of homelessness, and reaching out to the school and contacting that liaison to kind of problem solve or help reach out so that we can wrap around and put supports around the family and parent. We are definitely do it. Again, education is important, and that's our end goal, because we know that if they get an education, that there's better outcomes for them. And that's what we want. But we also know that unless they have the basic needs met, unless they have food on the table, a place to sleep, they aren't going to be able to focus all the time on education. We had 217 in hotel motels. That means that they did not have any income to put a down payment on or pay on a regular basis, so they would stay in hotel motels. And then we had 254 that were unsheltered. When we talk about unsheltered, some of this is also substandard housing. I've had families in sheds in the back of someone's home with a space heater during the winter. I've also had families that don't have heat or water in their house during our winters. And so that also falls under unsheltered because it is substandard. But that is where we see our youth living. What's really difficult is the doubled up, 2,466. Federally, the McKinney Vento, as I said, has two definitions. We have the HUD definition and we have the educational definition. It makes collaboration very difficult because our definition, educational definition, and we're trying to get families into a housing, they'll say, well, they're safe because they're doubled up, they're with somebody. Again, yes, they may be safe. And I've talked to unaccompanied youth that have really found someone that's a mentor to them and they're safe. I've already talked to families that you know, it's a good friend and they're helping them get on their feet. But I've also seen very horrific experiences of sexual assault, on abuse, just the emotional toll. When COVID hit, we had numerous families being asked to leave these doubled up situations because of the fear of getting COVID. So we had a number of families that were out on the streets for a while because they were asked to leave because of that fear of COVID. And I understand that fear of COVID, but again, that doubled up doesn't mean that you're safe. It just means maybe you have a roof under your head, but there's still a lot of concerns there that we need to be looking at. And I think if federally we could have an alignment in those definitions, then we could do a little bit more for these youth that are in these scenarios. We have youth that, you know, sleep someplace new every night. They're on a couch of a friend's. Their friends' parents will take them on one night. One night they may sleep in a car. So it's very hard to determine how to access. Our shelters will not allow youth that are not, under 18 to reside or stay in the shelters.
There's a question.
Yeah.
What is the excuse me, what is the current percentage of homeless youth that are trafficked in North Dakota?
You know, I do not have that. I wish I did, and I've been trying to dig a little deeper to see, because we know that that happens, but we don't have the percentage. But that's one of the things that we worry about with these unaccompanied youth. We definitely know that up north where the oil was, that we were seeing analogies of this, but we did not get numbers. The highest number of unaccompanied youth is in the Williston area. And what we were seeing were that families were coming in and they were leaving, but that the youth would be staying. And that was a very concerning to us, because there is a corridor there where youth are trafficked, but we don't have the percentage. We have identified usually every year, the past 4 or 5 years, about 300 youth that are unaccompanied homeless youth. That means that a youth is not with a parent or a guardian, that they are on their own and they don't have a permanent place to stay. Again, we know that this number is low. We have talked to youth that have said, yes, I was experiencing homelessness, but I didn't tell my teacher. I didn't want to go to residential or foster care. I wanted to stay in my school and graduate. amazing stories from these kids. I feel so sad. And they're still trying to get their education. These kids amaze me. Again, I can't imagine not having a place to sleep at night, not knowing where my food's going to come, and still get up and go to school or still make it to school. And that's why it's important that our liaisons kind of know those signs to look for when youth aren't being open and honest with us, to see, would there be an issue here in regards to, do they have a place to live? The other things is, when we look at youth that are experiencing homelessness, there are a lot of barriers for them. For example, we've had youth that come in late every day, and that if you didn't look close enough, they would get maybe detention for that. But then you find out, hey, they were living in a shelter. They had to take a bus across the river to get here, and the bus took so long, and so they were late. Or we had one youth who didn't have an alarm clock. And when the liaison finally sat down, the liaison said, we will get you an alarm clock. There are funds that are set aside for these youth, because sometimes those barriers can be identified and we can eradicate them so they can get to school and they can be successful in school. Okay, this is a little more data just on what we're seeing. If you look, kindergarten and first grade and second grade, that is where a bulk or a larger percentage of our homeless experiences taking place. Again, I indicated that we sometimes go to that stereotypical single man on the side of the road holding a sign, but very often it's families with young children that are experiencing homelessness. And so we see this in younger grades, and while it's still, there's still in every single grade, we see it in those grades in North Dakota, which is reflective of the nation. And then as you go up, I get a little bit concerned because you see 12th grade, only 5%, 11th grade, 5%, 10th grade, 6%. And you wonder, okay, where did these kids go? That's almost 50%. Hopefully they are housed, but my concern is that we are losing them because we are not identifying them appropriately and getting the supports and service that are needed. And we don't want to lose those kids. We really want to provide them with everything we can. We want our liaisons to wrap around supports within the school district, but also reach out to the community so that they can graduate, so they can go on to, you know, technical college or a college, whatever they would be interested in. A lot of these kids don't think they can or have the ability to go on to a technical college or a college just because there's been no conversation about that. And that doesn't mean their family doesn't want to go on, but when you are focused solely on survival, you can't do a lot of other things. Survival is everything. And so it's not that parents don't want to be engaged or involved. They're just so exhausted from trying to help their kids and get those basic needs met that they don't maybe have time to talk or look at, how do I get my child to a technical college or a college? We have funds set aside for schools to provide funds for applications for college. Those liaisons should be talking to these kids about going to a technical school or a college. And so that's where our data is right now. And then this is just a larger snapshot. Again, pre-K through 5th grade is about half of our youth where they're identified. And then you get in the higher grades and there's less, which again, I don't know if we're losing them or they're being housed. That data I still need to dig into.
We have a question.
Yeah.
If you identify a youth that is homeless under 18, do they go to foster care for the most part? What are the alternatives since they are non-adult but on their own?
That is an excellent question. And no, they don't necessarily go to foster care. And I will tell you, there's a number of reasons. First of all, McKinney Vento says your first obligation as a liaison is to identify that youth and enroll that youth. You do not, for example, we've had principals or superintendents, if a unaccompanied youth comes in and says, yes, I'd like to enroll, I'm staying with my friend, and so I'd like to enroll in school. Call the sheriff, and we've lost that child. I mean, the child took off. Our first obligation as a liaison is to enroll that child in school and get them into school, because we know if they're in school, they're safe. They have a connection. Now, liaisons also have their mandated reporters, so they do have to ask some questions in regards to that safety issue. But there are times, for example, that there is no guardianship and maybe an aunt stepped in because the mother could not find a place to live, was living in the car. And so she said, well, no, I don't have room for you, but I will take Ben and help him out. Or we have older students in which we've had a foster care provider say, you know, why don't you go stay at a friend's, or can you stay at a friend's? And, you know, there is not homes for some of these older youth. And so sometimes they're trying to figure out, okay, can you go stay with somebody? So there's a number of reasons why sometimes those older youth are not placed in foster care. At 17, a lot of times if you do an abuse and neglect report, the system is weighed down. If there's interpersonal conflicts and the child is staying with, you know, a neighbor or a friend, they will just say, okay, give me a call if you need me. So there's a number of reasons that some of these kids do not end up in foster care. And again, it's something that we are working on. We are actually working on some legislation that allows these youth to access services and supports. We've had youth talk to us about how their parents have kicked them out. And again, we don't know what's going on in the family. You know, I've had superintendents and principals say, well, I know the family and they're really good, so the kid just needs to go back into that home and, you know, listen to the parent. We as liaisons cannot do that. We do not know the situation in that home or the stressors in that home. We need to address the educational elements and the safety elements if they are couch surfing or they're sleeping in their car. And then also if we make a mandated, if we think there's abuse going on, then we will call. But we are looking at, when some of these youth will say, you know what, I just wanted to, for example, I'm not sure if you're familiar with YouthWorks. We've had kids turn to YouthWorks at 16, at 17, but they're unable to do anything with YouthWorks and do some of the independent programming because they cannot give consent. And we're trying to look at how can we have these kids access support without being fearful that they're going into foster care. The likelihood is that they won't go into foster care, but we still can't they can't access supports and services. In fact, for these 314 kids, it's very dangerous because I had a youth, and this happens every year. First, they can't get their shots or vaccines. They also can't get a sports physical, and we really encourage them to be active in extracurricular sports if they can, because that's more engagement. But if they are without a guardian, without a parent, those things cannot be accessed. We've had youth over the years that really struggled with their mental health, and we could not get them into a counselor. We knew that they were struggling. We knew that they were going downhill, but we were unable to have them access a counselor to kind of address their mental health issues until we got to the point that they either ended up in YCC or a psych hospital. And, you know, that rips out your heart when you see these kids trying to go to school and take on all these issues and their mental health is going down and they cannot access a counselor to go to help them support, or a doctor that could maybe get them on psychiatric meds if that was necessary. But because they're underage, that's closed down to them. So there are a group of people looking at some legislation that would help these youth access those supports and services. And we are engaging Department of Human Services on this because, again, We want to make sure these youth are safe. And we know that sometimes the foster care system doesn't have locations for them. So how can we work together to make sure that they can access these supports and services? Does that make sense? Again, that is a huge issue for our liaisons, because we have kids, about those 300 kids that cannot access any health care, any mental health care. And it gets to be very dangerous for them, especially if they're struggling with mental health issues and we cannot get them into a counselor, or if they have a health issue and it just festers and they get sicker and they miss more school. So it's a very vicious cycle that we would like to look at some options to help these kids with. Is there anything else, Kylie?
Not at this time, nope.
Okay. Then this is race of students experiencing homelessness. 32% are Native American, 36% are Caucasian, 1% is Asian, 14% Black, Hispanic is 16%, and Pacific is 1%. A note on Native American youth, one of my concerns a couple of years back was that we needed to do a better job at defining youth that were experiencing housing instability. But there are cultural elements that we need to be aware of. For example, Native American youth oftentimes live with family members, or they live in situations where there are multiple families, the grandparents, mothers, aunties, kids. And that is fine. That is, I mean, we want to support that as long as that is a choice. It's not due to economic instability. And so at one time, when I was working with the reservations, they're like, well, that is a typical experience for our people living with family members. And we want to foster that because, you know, absolutely, I would love if my mom or lived near me or with me. But is it due to housing insecurity? And if we do have to identify those so that we can say, hey, this is a need and how can we help this population so that we can get them services, and not just services, but services that are based on their needs and their culture. And so we had, at one point, we saw 1% here. We knew it was larger, and so we've been working on identifying those youth. And then here, it's a focus on 9th grade through 12th grade. Where are kids ending up? So we see 9% have dropped out between 9th and 12th grade of those experiencing homelessness. We see 17% are graduated. Unfortunately, we see 1%, which is a small percentage, but again, this is very concerning for me. It means they've reached maximum age. That means they're 21 or they're 18 and they're 18, they're 21. If they have a special education plan, they can stay in school. At 18, if they don't, or 19, they have to leave. So there was a few of them that they reached the maximum age. They were in school, they were working towards it. And because they reached that maximum age, we had to say, we can't help you anymore, which is a concern. Then we had 19 transferred. And here's my concern, the continued and the transferred. We don't know where that 19% transferred. An individual earlier asked about how do you identify a youth if they're not going to school? Usually we try to follow up when a youth transfers out to another school and reach out to them and send their credits and information. But sometimes when we reach out to the school that they were supposedly going to, they weren't there. So we don't know where that 19% transferred. And then the 54% continued. That means maybe they continued for a fifth year senior or a 6-year senior, which we would prefer. We want those youth to graduate. I don't care if it takes them 5 years or 6 years. We want those youth to graduate and we will support them. There are a couple of things that we are trying to do at NDDPI to help these kids. For example, if you wanted to get your GED, you would have to drop out of school and go for your GED. But we know that youth, for example, that are experiencing housing instability may be behind in credits. We just had a scenario where a youth was out of school for 2 years because of housing issues. And then she was picked up by foster care, but then she was very behind in credits. There was no way that she was going to graduate because she didn't have any credits. And well, she had to be there because foster care said you need to be there, and I understand why. She was becoming disengaged, and so we did put it in a plan where she was getting a credit for doing work on her GED. She was also doing work because she wanted to be a certified nurse assistant. So we came up with an individualized plan for her, and we're trying to help districts look at their youth and come up with more individual plans for them so that we can help these youth that sometimes are disengaged because they're behind in credits. And that's because of the multiple moves that they have experienced, or for example, they've gotten behind. When you get behind, you get discouraged. Think about being out of the office for 3 days and you come back and you have like 1,000 emails and 50 calls to wade through. That first day coming back can be very taxing. And again, that's in a work environment where there's an adult. You go in there with a kid and you feel behind, and it's overwhelming. So this is supports and services we have within the school. We have youth who are on individual education plans. That may mean that they have a disability that interferes in their education. It could be a behavioral, psychiatric, it could be other health impairment. For example, my kids had chronic pain and rare diseases that impacted their ability to go on a regular basis, so they would put in an IEP. But we have about 566 youth that are experiencing housing instability and are on an IEP. We have about 299 students that English is not their first language, and they're experiencing housing instability. We have migrant is not a huge population. And then Title I and school-wide, those are programs for youth in lower socioeconomic school districts where there's support like tutoring and math and reading wrapped around them. But again, our youth usually, if they're experiencing housing instability, they're also probably experiencing other barriers. So we try to wrap around supports and services around them based on their individual needs in order to help them graduate.
We have a question.
Yep.
Does North Dakota have a problem with pregnant homeless youth? Is that a special circumstance to help educate and house her?
Well, we do have a few instances of that. Again, not large instances, but we've had some really different districts step up and provide supports and services for young women who are pregnant, experiencing homelessness, and either are pregnant or have a child. We have one district actually that has been very, I think, innovative, and they have set up a course because there are courses that have some flexibility and said, okay, you are learning to be independent, so we're going to give you credits, and they lay out what that mother has to go through. That is very, she's learning it as she has her child, and she gets a credit for them. But they also support her in having the child there at the school. And so, yes, there are schools. Again, it's very, it's not a large number, but I have to say the schools do step up and try to provide that support. And then we also reach out to other services and support so that that student can go to school.
And then do you see a lot of couch surfing?
Yeah, we do. With a lot of those that are unaccompanied homeless, we do hear those youth talk about not just couch surfing, like you said. I had youth who were sleeping on, park benches. youth that actually had a car. That's all they had, and they slept in the car. But we have a lot of stories about those youth that are sleeping on couches and really don't know where they're going to stay the next night, or they'll stay at a friend's house for a week. Sometimes a friend's parents will allow them to stay there. Sometimes they find an older youth or older person who will let them stay there. That's when we get concerned about that trafficking. Again, sometimes these kids find places that are safe, but our concern has always been with a double definition. And when we're talking about double up, you are more vulnerable when you are staying with somebody who's allowing you to stay. You feel grateful, you feel indebted, you're embarrassed. There's so many factors there that make you so vulnerable. And so we would like the definition to change so that these families can get on housing. Any more questions?
With the challenges with COVID, are the schools helping homeless youth with alternative education?
Yes, this has been a challenge, but at the start of COVID, a number of that provided internet stepped up, and almost all of our students were covered. There was only one small area in Fort Totten that we did not have coverage, so that youth could, because when you think about it, you think about right now, I'm working from home, and then I have 2 children. You think of the bandwidth that it takes for them to be doing their stuff and me to do their stuff. That's expensive. I pay about $70 a month for internet. Think about a family that's experiencing housing issues, whether it's in the shelter, or if you're in a car, or if you're doubled up. And so in last year, we had that covered. Now we have it written in plans for the schools that they have to reach out and figure out how to assist those kids with getting education, whether, it's in larger school or larger states, they have actual buses that drive around with Wi-Fi attached to them. And again, we're talking warmer areas. So the kids can come and go out and study and hook up to Wi-Fi. They also do that around shelters where you have a larger bandwidth. But our districts look at these kids. I've talked to the liaisons to say, please follow up with these kids, check on them, talk with families in regards to their needs. Some of these families too, we're not just talking about access to internet or access to a tablet. We're also talking about PPE or hand sanitizer. I have the ability to go out and to buy PPEs for my kids and hand sanitizers, but they're expensive. If you look at face coverings, they are $15 a box sometimes. And so are these families able to access some of these things so they can be safe too? So we have liaisons reaching out. We do have a high populace, high percentage of youth that have disappeared. And so we're trying to follow up on them and try to check on them to see if the family's okay, if the child's okay, because of those situations where there's COVID and they're doubled up and the family is nervous in regards to having so many people in the home and that spreading of COVID. So the Department of Human Services has worked on some housing, particularly if a family's hit by COVID, where they can go and stay. But it has been really a difficult navigation, and I feel very sorry for these families. We have also had to, in some shelters, drop down the number of families or individuals we could take to meet the CDC guidelines. So it is a challenge. And my guess is, my educated guess, and that's even the educated guess of people that are amazing in this field, is that we will see more people experiencing housing instability because of COVID and because of our situation. And so we're trying to ramp up and discuss what are the options for these families. Okay, so I guess my last slide is I have a list of districts, and a list of homeless liaisons. I also have my name and number on the last slide, but we always want to partner. Our goal is educating youth, having them get education, but we also realize that education, you have to first focus on the basic needs. And so we always want to partner and help in any way possible a youth that is struggling, a family that is struggling, so that they have housing, so that they have food. And we coordinate and we want to partner. So this is a list. If there's ever anything that we can do or you think that I can do, again, our focus is helping these kids. We want them to graduate. They want to graduate. They want to be in school. They have more barriers than most, but the stories of these youth that are really trying to graduate, and they're taking care sometimes of their siblings. They're trying to have a job and trying to go to school. These kids are very resilient, and so we really want to wrap around supports and services. And I think that is all. Here's my contact information. You can reach me at. I think that is the end of my presentation, unless there's questions. And I again appreciate all of you listening. It's something I'm very passionate about, these youth, these students, and really to wrap those supports around them so we get better graduation rates and give them a chance.
We do have one last question before we wrap up. Do you see some students not want to admit homelessness for the fear of their parent or parents getting into trouble, or that the parent abandoned them? The child might fear them getting arrested. How do you handle the fears the children have? Yeah,
we do see that, and it is a difficult process. It's a sensitive process. Again, we talk about housing insecurity is not a reason for someone to be written up or a 960 to be filed. We talk to the youth about, we really just want to help them, get those supports and services, and there's things that we can assist you with and assist your family with, because it is hard to navigate sometimes. It's hard to figure out where to go when you're in crisis. It's hard to slow down and say, okay, what do I need to do first? It's hard to get out of that process. So we try to talk to the kids about just really, we want to help you. The difficult thing is there's a few times that maybe the family is struggling with other issues such as addiction, that there has to be an abuse and neglect filed. And we talk to the child about that not being their responsibility, that we really want to help them overall. Again, housing instability is not a reason for doing an abuse and neglect. What we want with these kids is really to help them. But we do have youth come forward that are older sometimes, that are more savvy in regards to the system, that are very, very concerned and are struggling because they want to graduate, but they may not have food, or their electricity may not be on, or their parents may not be supportive, but they're trying to figure out how to navigate everything to get to school, to get the basic needs. And again, it's a case-by-case basis. We work with the liaisons. Many of those liaisons within the school are counselors, so they have background information on how to work with families and kids. We also offer a lot of professional development. And then again, we have people at NDDPI, for example, special educators and counselors that come in and offer webinars also.
All right, I believe that wraps up all the questions.
All right, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And those of you that are still on, we will be sending out a survey at the end of this. And if you could please fill that out with any and all feedback, that is great. It helps us for future trainings. And if anybody has any questions for Beth, her email and phone number are on the last slide there. So thank you guys again all for attending today's training, and hopefully see you guys in the next coming weeks with the rest of our trainings for the year. So thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving.
I was going to say it. All right, stay safe. Bye.